I'm Kate Fletcher, and as well as being a member of Bromley House Library, I'm also an artist. And I'm here in my attic studio in Forest Fields, which is in my home. And I'm going to show you some of the pictures that I've been working on of Bromley House garden flowers. This came out of a proposal that I put to Mel Jeffs last year in 2019, when the building work was going on and the garden looked a bit taken over by building work, and I suggested that I could paint some paintings. I'm a watercolour painter, and we could sell them to raise some money to fettle up the garden a bit, and that would be a nice idea, and Mel said she thought so too. So I persuaded my friend Chris Orme, who's got a lovely camera and she's a great photographer, to take some photos for me, because I work from photographs and I use these to make a composition and then paint my watercolours, larger than life usually. And so I've run out of things to say. Chris and I started in January, the way you do with all good New Year resolutions, January 2020, and we visited the garden several times over the next few weeks. And this is the first painting that I made in the series. I've called it January, when there's nothing interesting in the garden, just saying, because actually there are beautiful things happening in the garden in January. You only have to look. So we've got some hellebores, some little cyclamen leaves, a young acanthus leaf. I don't know what the other things are. I think this is called Lords and Ladies. But the vibrant green on a sunny day in January of the new leaves is just fabulous. I've included this study of the euphorbia because I wanted you to see a bit about how I work, because it's quite a slow, laborious process actually, which I find totally absorbing, but each picture takes a long time. The euphorbia is such a gorgeous green flower, and the colours vary from a kind of day glow yellow right through to a gorgeous sort of turquoise, like the colours you get in those felt tips that you use for highlighting in offices when I used to work in offices. I got completely bewildered by this flower because it's so complicated. So what I then did was abandon, or at least put on hold, this study, and I decided to concentrate on a picture of one of the flower stalks. But actually I've got quite bogged down in this again, so I'm going to have to go larger in order to study the plant better, so that I can finish my original idea for that composition. I know it's a cliche that in the early spring we get crocuses and snowdrops, but everybody loves them, and it's because they're part of that herald of the new year that's coming, with all the summer to look forward to. So of course I've included a study of some crocuses from the lawn in the garden and some snowdrops just coming up out of the leaf litter in one of the beds on the north side of the garden. All of these paintings will be exhibited either next year, 2021, or possibly the year after. A lot depends on other building that needs to be carried out. They'll all be for sale, and a large proportion of the proceeds will go directly to supporting Bromley House, and particularly the library. So if you're interested in buying any, you could buy in advance, and you can get details of prices and sizes and how I'm going to have them framed, either from the library, or you could contact me direct. I've got a public Facebook group called Kate Fletcher Paintings, where you can see my other work, and you can contact me easily through that if you're on Facebook. This camellia was my original inspiration for the idea of painting the flowers in the garden. I don't know what it's called, but I think it's so beautiful, and my working title for this picture is Camellia Vanilla Soft Scoop, because I think it looks like exactly like that ice cream that you can buy in big plastic containers at the supermarket, and it's so nice with an apple crumble. I'm sure somebody knows the answer to what it's called. I'm sure the gardener does. They're so knowledgeable and they make the garden so beautiful. A sprig of rosemary from the rosemary bush that's in the island bed in the middle of the flagstones. This is the second painting I've done of this because the flowers were so complex. I think they look like little people kind of descending out of the sky, or maybe angels or something. I think they're absolutely gorgeous. I was familiar with the plant because I have it in my own garden, but I've never looked at it so carefully until I started painting it. This plant was actually in bloom in February, I think, in 2020. And I think it's such an interesting thing about the garden that it's so sheltered that you get plants that should be arriving in summer are there somehow in the early spring. It was gorgeous. I hope you like it. Another surprise, this flower was actually photographed in January of 2020. It was still there on the shrub from last summer, I'm guessing. But I love the way the fuchsias look like little tiny ballerinas with their feet en pointe and their skirts flared out. It's also a white flower, which I'm finding increasingly interesting to paint because the shadows are so complex. So Chris and I were doing really well. We were coming into the garden every couple of weeks and taking some lovely photographs, and then Chris was emailing them to me and I was using them to create interesting, I hope, compositions for you to enjoy. And then of course we had March, and we all know what happened in March. So I was left with no material and I was a bit devastated, really. I know it's a bit trivial, but I was desperate to paint a picture of the beautiful magnolia flowers, and they were just about to bloom when lockdown happened. So I thought, well, I'll turn to some other ideas. So I looked indoors. Here's a study of the amaryllis that Amy grows in the library every year, I think. She grows all the houseplants around, and I believe that they contribute moisture to the environment, which is good for the books. So this is a picture of the amaryllis that was in the main part of the library in 2019, and I took it at 2-week intervals from when it was a bud through to in full bloom, and then when it was dying. I almost like the last one the best. I added the whimsical butterflies, although they are real butterflies. I mean, they're studies of real butterflies, but of course they don't actually come in the library, but I just thought they looked nice. I think they're called painted ladies, but somebody else will know better than me. Here's my other lockdown contribution. Those of you who are photographers, and maybe a lot of others as well, will be familiar with the tale about the studio in the attic of the library, where the original photographer in the 1840s had glass filters, red and blue, and the red one is still in the roof, but the blue one disappeared a long time ago, and it was always referred to as Snapdragon Blue. And we didn't really know why, because you don't get blue snapdragons. But then I think a fellow member discovered that actually in the United States people grow a garden flower which they call the blue snapdragon. So we researched it, and Sally, one of the librarians, found its Latin name and sent me a link. And here's a picture of Angelonia angustifolia, this is a modern cultivar of the original snapdragon. So I chose to paint this with the bud there, and then the open flower and the dying flower, because I'm not a photographer myself, so I didn't really know what sort of blue would be implied by the blue snapdragon used as a photographic filter. I suspect it's the paler one in the bud. So I was getting very interested in pollinators at the time, and I discovered that this particular flower is pollinated by an oil bee, which I had never heard of which there are nearly 20 different kinds of oil bee. This one is Centris nitida, which I've included. It wasn't on the flower in the original picture, but I thought it makes a nice addition to see a pollinator. And this picture is not quite finished, but it's given me an inspiration to include some pollinators in with the other flowers. For example, I discovered that there are bees, not honeybees, but bees are flitting about when the crocuses are in bloom in February, and they actually pollinate the crocus flowers. So I just thought, what a nice idea. I might get round to it or not. I'll end by saying what a great job I think the gardeners do at Bromley House Library. If you've been in the garden lately since lockdown was eased, you'll have noticed that the garden's kept going beautifully while we've been not able to visit, and the gardeners have kept going with keeping it looking nice, and there's a fabulous collection of plants there. In the course of planning this project, one of the librarians, Matt, supplied me with a Nottinghamshire herbarium, which some of you might be familiar with. And one of my ideas that I was working with was the idea of finding things that are in the garden. They might be wildflowers or what we might call weeds, but they might be also in the Nottinghamshire herbarium, and that's a project for when I pick it all up again next year. The last thing I want to say is that I was looking for inspiration for my next tranche of paintings. I've been very thrown by lockdown, and I've not been able to paint very much, and so I'd like some ideas from any of you about any plants that you particularly like that are growing in Bromley House Library. And over the next few months, Chris and I will visit again and photograph those, and I'll do some paintings of them, I hope. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.